Hello, everybody, and welcome to This Week in Enterprise Tech. If you can look at our backgrounds, you can see that this is a little bit different from usual. Both Charlie and I are on the road this week as we are checking out the world of IT and going to different trade shows. I'm over in San Diego, whereas Charlie, where are you right now?
I'm in Denver.
In Denver, gosh. So we are traveling, traversing through hotel Wi-Fi and trying to make sure that we can get the week out as quickly as possible. But it's been an interesting week, actually. There's been a combination of acquisitions and uh, and government work and all sorts of other things that are happening that are going to affect the CIO world. So first, let's start with the big acquisition of last week, which was IBM acquiring HashiCorp. It's a big acquisition, $6 billion, but also one that kind of seemed a little bit inevitable in that HashiCorp has always been making most of its money off of big sales to large enterprises for these for kind of projects that were very substantial in nature, which is where IBM really shines.
Yeah, this one, I won't say it left me head scratching. I agree with you to a certain degree. It's natural, particularly given IBM's recent history of doing these sorts of acquisitions, of sort of building out this portfolio. The part that I don't know that I fully get is what, other than capturing this revenue, what they're really getting. They're not getting access to customers. I would be shocked if these aren't completely overlapping. They already have a lot of cloud offering components. I mean, I don't. You can make an argument that they were losing to HashiCorp, but I don't know. This one, and maybe that's why. Maybe that was the whole impetus behind it. But you seem to have a broader perspective or take on it. So I'm curious how you think it plays out for them.
Yeah, I feel like IBM doesn't have to buy new customers at this point. Their entire goal is to get to however you think about that global 2000 or Fortune 500. They talk to large enterprises and they help them solve multi-million dollar problems. So anytime they can pick up any solution that helps with provisioning clouds, provisioning data centers, helping with orchestration and automation and security. That's a piece for them. And uh, IBM is one of the companies out there that is really good at adding $100,000 or $500,000 pieces to an enterprise contract. You know, IBM and Oracle are fantastic
Yeah.
at that kind of thing.
I guess what confuses me or worries me about it is that I feel, and it worries me for HashiCorp, right? Is that I feel like they have this history of buying a bunch of interrelated or adjacent companies, which ends up muddying their message and it being very
Mhm.
confusing. I look at what they've done in the monitoring observability space, and it's like I look at they have, and I'm not going to go through them, but a whole bunch of different acquisitions they did, and it's like okay, they don't all do exactly the same thing, but they're really close. And now they're all under the IBM banner. They're maintaining independent brands, and it's just like it's really confusing. And I fear that this is going to be a sort of similar story, and it's sort of like what we were talking about with Broadcom the other day. That it's I feel like IBM sort of going that path, and I'd much rather see, even though it fell apart, like the Salesforce acquisition or potential acquisition of Informatica. While having its own issues, was I think represents like a better strategic approach to the market where they're actively looking at how they flesh out specific parts of what they're doing to drive a go-to-market strategy that's transformative for the organization. And I just don't see this acquisition of doing that for IBM. So that's where I was like, I'm not sure I get it entirely. I mean, I get it like on paper, but I don't like get this strategically. So anyway.
Yes, there's definitely been a history of acquisitions that don't work out because you have multiple products you've never actually standardized on a platform. We've talked in previous episodes about the power of the platform with the likes of ServiceNow, Zoho, etc. In some ways, HashiCorp is the opposite of that with the proliferation of products that they have due to growth by M&A. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether IBM can tie that together. But I also think that IBM has invested a lot in multi-cloud, trying to figure out how to make this whole private multi-cloud, hybrid multi-cloud space work through acquisitions like Aptio and Instana and like all these other little pieces of the puzzle to look at multi-cloud from a financial perspective or an operational perspective. And so this fits into that puzzle of saying,
And I do agree with that. The multi-cloud angle is the most compelling part of this story if they execute on some integrated messaging and vision, and that's the question as to whether or not they can do that. But speaking of acquisitions, that wasn't the only one. There was another, a going private story, and then an IPO that both I think are sending, all of these combined sort of send like these sort of weird mixed signals about, if I'm a CIO, like where do I place bets? Does this matter at all? Is this affecting everything? So I don't know if you want to queue up that part of the conversation.
yeah, so a couple of other different acquisitions we saw, transactions we saw was Thoma Bravo taking Darktrace private in a $5 billion deal, as well as seeing the Rubrik IPO that had been expected for some time, but all the IPOs have been held up for a while now. But now we're starting to see these transactions again, where we're seeing these $5 billion, $10 billion basically market valuations. And I think this is a real challenge for the CIO office, because now you have to look at all of your mid-sized vendors and wonder, are they going to get acquired? Are they seen either as features or as strategic pieces of a portfolio that could get picked up? Are they about to go private? If their stock isn't doing as well as could be expected, are they an acquisition target or a going private target? And how is that going to affect our operations? Because obviously, every time a company goes private, you do things like you wipe out marketing in the short term because you're trying to optimize the company, or you're trying to focus on some sort of product specific focus. Or if you are being acquired, obviously the parts that the larger company cares about are going to be focused on, while all of the little bits which you may be very dependent on might start disappearing. We're even seeing that with Broadcom VMware
I was just going to say,
acquisition. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's always the concern, and I think it is making it very difficult because we've historically had, I would say, more consistent trends, and like this week alone, we had all effectively sort of all three patterns play out in big ways, and it leaves you going, which way is the wind blowing on all this, right? So we have this IBM acquisition, which to me, we just talked about, and then the going private. So I'm not a security guy, so I'm not 100% sure on all of as far as where the company's coming from. I generally think going private is good for organizations, particularly if they've struggled in the public markets, or that's created pressure where they're making bad, short-term decisions at the cost of their long-term strategy. And so that one, and I think Thoma Bravo has done a great job of being really smart at picking that. So like for me, that would be a positive sign. And then the Rubik run, I think it's great. I think it's definitely indicating that there's a renewed appetite in the market, and that's, I think, good for everybody. What left me scratching my head a bit is part of the reason there's been all this downward pressure on particularly startups is that everyone was looking for profitability, and Rubrik goes public, has this huge pop, and they're still losing money, and it's like
Right.
it's going back to the future. And so, I found it looking at this, and I found no clarity. And I think it makes it very challenging if you're a CIO of trying to figure out, where you place these bets, or maybe more importantly, maybe the big message is it doesn't matter, right? As long as they have decent capitalization, good technology, that you are looking at it, like you just said, are they strategic? Do we expect them to remain independent, or are they an acquisition target? And just kind of thinking about how that may impact you. Maybe that's all you need to be doing.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing that I noticed though is just the size of this company. If you know that you are working with companies that are called, 100 to 500 million in annual revenue right now, those companies are all targets for something. You're not quite sure what it's going to be, but the floodgates are open again. The money is ready again. There's no, it's not like it's been the past couple of years where markets were frozen and you would pretty much expect your vendors to work as usual because they had nowhere else to go.
So Rubrik sort of goes against what I'm about to say, but I also think that this is indicative of what we've talked about in the past about this broader shift to larger platform buys versus these small, independent, best of breed sort of solutions. I think we are in this sort of race to $1 billion. That seems to be the magic number now. If you get to $1 billion in run rate revenue, then you have a seat at the table to kind of play with the big boys, and
Yeah.
and anything below that, I agree. And so I think that definitely does kind of flavor how you look at it.
Yeah, because from a stock perspective, that $1 billion in revenue probably means you can call yourself a $10 billion company, and then you start becoming a real company in tech terms.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's see. We had what? I'm sorry, I don't have my notes up. What was
Yeah.
that other?
So the next story that got my attention was just around how Microsoft's AI lead is starting to get the attention of Amazon, and how this is affecting cloud spend. Obviously, we've been looking at AI spend and cloud spend for a while here, but it's interesting to see how that AI is actually having some sort of significant effect on cloud as everybody's experimenting.
Yeah, what I found interesting, so this is coming from an article out of Reuters, and what it really is talking about is the fact that AI, or Microsoft rather, is growing, catching up, right? Amazon, AWS is they've been this big fight for a long time ago, for a long time now, trying to outpace each other, and AWS has had the super strong lead because they were so early in the market, and Microsoft has been playing catch up. But what's interesting is that they seem to be getting a halo effect bump, but not because they're getting spend related to AI exactly. It's that people are looking at them now much harder because of their AI capabilities. But I still think what I found most interesting about it is I think all the issues that we've talked about historically or in the past here about the challenges with ROI. Are we actually seeing people making true, meaningful investments? Do we have enterprise use cases that are actually making sense and driving, actual transformation or actual business outcomes? And the answer to all that right now is mostly, either no or too early to tell. And so, from that prism, you look at a lot of the AI startups are struggling to find revenue. We're seeing a lot of people are struggling to show any results. And Microsoft's the big exception to that, yet they're not really doing it based on the AI workloads themselves. They're doing it just based on this halo effect, and that's fascinating to me. And I think that may be very instructive to how AWS actually then starts approaching the market. So it was a really interesting data. So I definitely encourage you to read it.
Yeah,
I know you read it.
I've here at Tableau conference, I've been talking obviously with a bunch of people working on data on AI projects, and a couple of things that they bring up consistently are that as they're trying to work with AI, they really need to figure out their data engineering and their data quality. They also need to figure out some sort of model testing capability, which is much more like software testing, where you might do some sort of unit-based testing or group-based pen testing of the model from a practical perspective. Basically, looking at all the quotes that you might and all the prompts that you might put into a model and just figure out what kind of responses you get. You have to put all of these kind of very standard software lifecycle practices into place with your models and data. So when you think about that, Microsoft makes a whole lot of sense as a company that has supported software for a really, really long time.
Yeah, I think we're going to see this continuing evolution around it. I'm also struck. So I'm at a conference that's focused on IT support and IT management, and so it's definitely a different audience, and I think definitely a much less technical audience. But it is shocking to see the absolute sort of lack of understanding and confusion around anything to do with AI. And so I think we have a very long road here and a long evolution. I think we're absolutely going to be entering this sort of era of the AI haves and have-nots. And I think that's really going to create these sort of shifts. And I think the real challenge is going to be for that like mid-market CIO, where
Mhm.
they're not going to have the resources to go hard. And so in terms of actually like doing a lot of stuff you're just talking about, hardcore development. And so it's like, well, where do they land? How do they partner? Who are they picking with? Which actually brings up another topic, which I was fascinated by this week. And that is the Snowflake sort of response to the Databricks thing that we talked about, I guess, about a month ago, with this idea of a bespoke enterprise LLM. And what was fascinating for me is when I read it, I often when I'm reading, I do a highlight and I take a note. And my very first note was, oh, this is an also ran. Clearly a response to Databricks, and it's the same thing. But what was interesting, there are two things I found really interesting about the press release blog post that they wrote doing this. First, very, very technical, very open, right? One of the big things they're hanging their hat on is that they're truly being open about this, and they're opening up their weights, their actual data, right? I mean, much, much more open than the other open AI approaches. And in this blog post went very, very technical in how they're doing this. The other thing, they're claiming that they're lowering the cost even more. From, Databricks was out there saying we can do this for 10 million. Snowflake's now saying 2 million. But probably the most interesting was that they took this 3-tiered training approach, where the first tier, or first, I'm not sure if that's what they called it, but the first pass was like general LLM training, and then 2 passes that were very, very specific to enterprise data, to enterprise needs, and focused on development. And so, I love that we're now finally seeing this shift to how we actually address enterprise issues with all of this. And, contrasted to, OpenAI is making a lot of enterprise stuff pushes, but I feel like all they're doing is say, hey, use our GPTs, right? Whereas this Snowflake approach looks, and the Databricks as well, but I think this is like even a step further, where it's like, these are really pragmatic approaches to how an enterprise can start now truly experimenting with building out a model and building out an AI approach that they can really operationalize with their data and bring to market. And so it was a really fascinating kind of conversation to see where it's going.
Yeah, I was surprised by this as well. I thought this was going to be a Me Too approach, but then as I looked at the announcement, we talked about the mixture of experts approach with the Databricks model that recently came out, but Snowflake took this to a whole nother level. The previous mixture of experts approaches have created maybe a few experts that might be approached. Snowflake has created 128 different experts, basically model branches that will allow for doing specific tasks very well. And then so you have this core model, and then based on what you're trying to do, Snowflake will pick two of these experts to help complete your work. And then the end result is being able to access the call it 15 to 20 billion parameters that really matter for solving your problem from a model perspective, rather than the entire 400 billion or whatever it is approach that is happening in some other LLMs, where they say you need to go through all of our parameters to figure out what's going right. Snowflake is doing a very good job of focusing on the specific capabilities and functions that you're looking at, which it makes a lot of sense actually when you think about Snowflake being a very enterprise focused and very data focused and being purpose built for the data's tasks that they're trying to solve. So I think Snowflake's actually figured out how to take a bit of a lead for the moment in LLMs from an enterprise perspective in doing this.
You mean for the next 10 minutes?
Yes, for the next 10 minutes. Who knows how long that's going to last, but for I guess Snowflake for this month has figured out how to have a market leading LLM, and honestly that's as far as I can go, because honestly every couple of weeks something happens in the LLM space that is groundbreaking and new and absolutely different. But I do think that the big picture here is that the mixture of experts effort is an important one to consider from an LLM perspective, and that should be considered kind of the state of the art for 2024. And if you're not looking at that, you are probably going to be spending a lot more money on compute because you're using these bloated models that only have a single approach for working.
Yeah, so getting back to the sort of pragmatic elements of this, I think clearly this is a sign the mixture of experts, at least for right now, is going to probably be the winning approach, or certainly a prominent approach to solve this. It's also related to this whole broader movement around things like agentic AI, which is also about, how do I take these models and extend them with more authoritative data sources to reduce things like hallucinations. And I also think it's connected to this idea of finding smaller approaches. So we're not going to talk about all this because they weren't on our list, but Microsoft released their own small LLM, a very small parameter-based LLM. There's a lot of news. Apple has a new patent that they're putting stuff out in the public domain right now about their approaches, clearly going out for device-based LLM sort of activities. So I think we're seeing this trend towards now not just going for big, but how do we get this thing small and how do we get it to something that's manageable? And so I think we're seeing this evolution where people are starting to get more pragmatic most of the time. But then we have these other news items that make you go, what are these people thinking? And so there's two related ones. One is a company called Clean Lab is coming to market with something. I don't have it up for what they call, but basically it's about trying to prove the validity of LLM generated responses. And I'm not bullish on it in the long haul insofar as it's an insanely expensive approach. To try to say that this answer, how much the idea is it gives you like a rating of how much you can trust this answer. But what it speaks to that is something that I think is getting lost in a lot of the conversations I'm having is that LLMs are incredibly fallible. They're incredibly inconsistent and very useful for creative things, very useful for things where it's at, where you've got some allowance in there, but, not stuff you should be trusting core business decisions to, at least on its own. And then there's a story that came out about Moderna that is going all in on OpenAI GPTs and using it to, in their words, transform every business process in the organization. And I'm like, these guys are nuts. It's like that just doesn't make. And I'm really confident this is like PR hype, that it's not true, but it's just staggering. And it does a disservice to the industry that somehow that's the answer. You just need to go and deploy GPTs everywhere, and it's going to solve everything. And it was honestly distressing for me when I read this. I laughed and then cried, it's just, my God.
I'd watch it over and over and again. Yes. Moderna, I think, has done a fantastic job of marketing itself throughout the years. I probably have a little bit of Moderna in me right now from the COVID shots. Yeah, it doesn't make much sense to try to just LLM every single process you have, especially when you think about from a practical perspective what Moderna is. They're a pharma company, right? So you've got computational chemistry, you've got clinical trials, you've got pharma manufacturing, you've got pharma sales. Like, those are the core aspects of what they do. And honestly, a lot of that isn't automated in that you will have people involved in every step of the process, and you'd better, or else you're not going to be able to manage the process with the oversight that you needed to be able to actually run the business. So I just don't understand how much of that can actually be automated to a point that you would trust an LLM to make good decisions. But good for Moderna for getting a story in the Wall Street Journal about a technical approach. My bigger concern is with the Clean Lab announcements, talking about how they can rate the veracity of large language model response. As you mentioned, this is really expensive to operate. This is starting to feel like we're finding excuses to spend more and more money to spin the wheels over and over again, kind of like when I guess Bitcoin is hot again right now, but when we're talking about all the cryptocurrencies and the need to mine and just throw computing resources for the sake of throwing computing resources at a problem, that kind of feels like where we are to a great extent with AI right now. We're trying to find reasons to spend as much money as humanly possible to verify a model, whereas often we're just trying to practically do some very basic fact-based checks of the outputs.
Well, it goes back to the issue, and I don't think we actually ended up sharing the article, but right now, LLMs are a hammer, and we're trying to turn everything into a nail. And
Mhm.
this is just me, if you need that much validation of the answer, don't use an LM to solve that business problem, right?
Yeah.
That's really what this comes down to. And that's why I'm bearish on this whole clean lab approach, because it's a solution to a problem we shouldn't have, right? It's like we need to be building in elements into the models themselves, using mixture of experts, using agentic AI approaches that reduce hallucinations, and then not using it for things where we need it to be 100% controlled and accurate, and use other predictive approaches to AI that will do that. And so
Yeah.
it just, it just, to me, it's just a completely wrong-headed approach. But it speaks to a broader challenge that I think is extremely relevant and extremely challenging right now. And that is, how do I provide governance around AI? And I was just at this event talking to a former CIO friend of mine, and saying that this is what he's hearing from he's now like doing advisory services to CIOs. He says
Mhm.
every one of them is saying, what is my AI governance policy? What is my AI strategy? And the first thing I said is, you don't have one. It's this much more complex thing, but it's a real challenge on how you create it. And so we are seeing that play out in real time. And there's a new announcement coming out of the DHS of how their approach. So I don't know if you want to cue that one up to talk about the whole kind of governance challenges around all of this.
Yeah, so the DHS is working on their AI safety board, and they have a very interesting set of executives. I was going to say a murderer's row but then I kind of, to use the baseball analogy, but then I started looking at the list, and it seemed like it was all over the place. Yes, you have the OpenAI and Anthropic CEOs there, but you also have random politicians who are in place here. You have the CEO of Adobe, which kind of makes sense, and then Fei Li, who makes sense, but then also the CEO of Northrop Grumman, which is obviously talking to the military, military distributors and providers. There's all sorts of random people, and then Maya Wiley, the Leadership Conference of Civil and Human Rights. It's like I'm not quite sure where this is going, except to say that they put a lot of people on this board who are probably going to be making some sort of compliance or governance decisions, or providing some sort of feedback for this AI, for how they're going to be looking at AI going forward. And I think this just speaks to the challenges and the difficulty of figuring out what kind of feedback you're even looking for as you're trying.
Well, so, yeah, so a few things. I mean, my first response is like, when you go through, and the article itself, it listed like the highlights, and the CEO of AWS and the CEO of Adobe weren't even listed in the article. It's like, wow, what that tells you what kind of list it is. But yeah, you have the governor of Maryland, you have all these, all over the place. I'm actually probably a little bit more hopeful about this. Remember, it's DHS, so they're focused on this huge remit of keeping the homeland safe, right? Of all these kind of security elements, touches everything,
Mhm.
and they're dealing with security risk at a cyber level, but also how does this apply on a physical plant level. So I think that it's a very difficult challenge that they're trying to address, and trying to anticipate all the different ways that AI can impact all of this. And I think it does speak to what I was telling my friend Greg, is that the first thing is that I think CIOs should be leading the conversation around the AI governance challenge. And then the second thing is, they better not be doing it alone, right? They need to go and be engaging literally every functional group within the organization, and have them a part of this conversation, because you just don't know where the impact is going to be. But we're pretty confident the impact is going to be everywhere, at least to varying degrees. And so I think that's what you're seeing sort of play out here, is that you have this massive swath. Now, the big challenge for both the DHS, and I think for the average CIO trying to do this, is, how do you herd those cats? How do you have that many people in the room with, not only they're all used to being the most important person in the room, and they're all in the same room, and with very divergent needs, opinions, agendas, and trying to rationalize all that. So my big concern for DHS, my big concern if you're a CIO trying to do this, is, can you actually get anything done? Is that in fact an effective way to govern it? I don't know, but I think it's a way, it's a place you need to start. And so to me, the real question will be, what do they do? And really going to be the working groups and committees they form out of this, where they assign dedicated staff to actually get this done. So I think that the big thing that this did is the stake in the ground. These are super big names, super tons of credibility, and that is a really important like organizational change step to say this is critical. This is something we're taking very, very seriously. And then let's hope they can transition to getting the real work done.
Yeah, I do. I'm always kind of amused when I see these large government boards, though, because it seems that they're like, first of all, will they ever actually meet? And if so, what kinds of standards will they put into place? And the weird thing is, because these people are so high at such a high level, the different if this could mean nothing, this could actually mean some significant changes happening in AI governance that will come to affect us. And it's really hard to tell until before you see what level of interaction these people end up having with each other.
Yeah, I think that it is absolutely true. It's too early to tell. I see it
Mhm.
as a good sign. I see it as a good model to follow. And if I
But
was
yes, having that advisory board and having them be very high level, perhaps at the same level of quality as your actual board of directors, seems to be important, because the judgment needed for AI is definitely going to be at a the judgment necessary is going to be at a very high level.
Yeah, and that's a great point if you're a CIO, that if you as you're forming your governance and your strategy efforts, that it needs to include all of your internal top leaders. There needs to have that big staking around, but you also need that external input to do that.
Mhm.
And I think that's another critical takeaway. So I think there's good lessons learned here. How this particular thing plays out. What I find probably most shocking about it is DHS, while critical and important, is also just one function of the federal government. I'm really surprised if you're going to have this kind of star power that it isn't at a higher level than just DHS. That was the other part that was so. I think this is a story that is going to continue to unfold, but
But are we going to see
fascinating.
Sam Altman on 17 different government
Exactly.
department
Which,
boards?
which doesn't make any sense. So yeah,
Yeah,
well, we'll have to see how this all goes. But I think there's some at least some good interim lessons learned. And with that, I think those are all of our topics. If you're following along, we're trying to make a very concerted effort to make things a little bit more concise and digestible. So hopefully we have achieved that. It helps that both Hyoun and I have meetings to get to today because we're both traveling. So it forced us to be a little bit focused. But I thought it was a good conversation. We covered a lot of ground.
excellent. As always, such a pleasure to talk to you and to cover the week in enterprise tech. And looking forward to next week.